Thank you for joining us today, where we discuss why relationships matter. We'll reconstruct the organization and social structure of a ransomware gang. I am Jean Kemp, and I am pleased and proud to be here and proud of the honors provided to me by my peers in IEEE, the ACM, and the AAAS. I'm going to talk to you about how to look at e-crime in a different way as an industry.
And I am Dalya Manatova. I am a doctoral researcher. I'm also an Austrian fellow at Indiana University. And I will show how we can use discourse and social network analysis to study the largest ransomware organization out there.
And together, we'll show you how this lens can inform your view of threat management. So modern e-crime, you'll see this discussion a lot. The attackers are described as exciting. They're innovative and sophisticated attacks. And certainly there are attackers out there like that. You don't need to prove it to me. Thank you. I know you exist. You don't have to attack me. However, reputation maximizing. But honestly, a lot of e-crime today is boring. It must be incredibly tedious to sit in a cubicle and say, "Hi, I'm calling you from Microsoft Technical Support." So these are organizations that are standardized, branded, and they are resilience maximizing. Everyone in this room has been part of an organization and watched it do something sort of perverse for its own bureaucratic interest, rather than strictly profit maximizing. And e-crime communities, like organizations, have their own social systems, not just the natural connections, like all the friends you got to see today here that you only see once a year at Black Hat, formal hierarchies, the reputations, the people who might not be in the role that you're seeking, but have the knowledge that you need, and patterns of communication, how things really work. I will tell you as an academic, the dean is the top of our organizational chart, and we've not had a dean for a year, but if the dean's secretary is sick for a week, the entire department falls apart. So e-crime communities can also be seen as organizations. Here we are clustered in a specific forum, Black Hat, by topic, and they also cluster by type of crime, level of skill, by language, culture, and region. And we know that e-crime can be seen as communities. There's a significant amount of research and discussion here about how the arbitration happens, how things are bought and sold, how these communities and forums work as marketplaces. But they're also organizations. They're organizations where people have roles and they have tasks. Your attack chain is their task management. There's organizations of different scale that can do massive attacks and massive botnet attacks, but there's also organizations with different scopes and ranges of expertise. All the things we know about organizations we can use to understand these e-crime forums. And that's what we'll be talking about. So what kind of tools are these? Linguistic tools, social network analysis, organizational mapping. And again, if you think about your attack chain as their task management, it can give you a different way to view the threats and risks that you face. Cybercrime groups are businesses. Let's study them like they're businesses. So if they're businesses, what kind of things do we know make a difference in their resilience? So your advanced persistent threat is their mature, resilient organization. So your advanced persistent threats, their resilient organization. So let's talk about, are these going to be resilient organizations? Are they going to bring you advanced persistent threats? Well, is there a hierarchy? Are they organized? Are they structured? Are they extremely specialized? Is this the organization that you should be most worried about. Just because they're the biggest e-crime organization doesn't mean they're the most dangerous to you. The organizations have stated goals and goal directions, but as anyone who's ever been in a meeting knows, sometimes you don't always follow your mission statement. And instead, you're governed by these kind of formal or informal or cultural guidelines that may or may not be associated with a formal statement, and these are often driven by who you know. So, what are we concerned about when we think about these organizations as advanced persistent threat? Well, there's 3 dimensions focused on the ability of the specific thing to function. Can they attack you? Focused on long-term survival. Are they going to reform 10 minutes after the takedown? Or can you see the takedown, a notice from the FBI, and say, ah. And their ability to continue to function as an organization, as opposed to just do what they're told. So, how do we understand e-crime? We talked about linguistics. So let's talk about slang and technical jargon. Here, I'm assuming in American companies. I realize Black Hat is global, but this is Black Hat USA. So, and there's often a shared culture. We've heard quite a bit about the global threat management. I would like to say, I've never met Jeff Moss, but if I asked him to give a keynote to set us up, that would have been it. And cultural barriers to understanding between the market that is those forums. Also, shared context, where you talk about what kind of reciprocity is going to hold. Why do you believe if you pay that ransomware, they'll delete your data? Is that a reasonable belief with the people you're dealing with? And you can see this is like your own supply chain. Here's some examples of jargon. If you look at machine translation, we'll make the slides available, but like, oh, well, give us soap. They're not actually telling their coworker to take a shower. Send an email. So jargon can confuse targeting if you just use automatic translation. Here's an example, unsubscribe, user 6. They're spamming the email in the forum. If you took that to mean what the translation means, you'd think, oh, I can't push these guys. I don't want to spam them. But if you look at what it actually means, they're like, oh, would you reply to user 6? They have sent us 100 emails already, which is a completely different operational response based on understanding their jargon. And how do we understand their targeting? You have to look at the shared humor and how that contributes to resilience and motivation. And this requires understanding the cultural context. Here's a message that Dalya graciously explained to me was on National Founders Day, Father's Day.
Father's Defenders Day.
Founders Day. Happy holiday, let's beat the Amers. Correctly translated, beat should be bend. Why should we care? It's not because it's impolite, it's because it aligns with a particular political ideology, and that political ideology can inform your likelihood of being targeted. Then when you look at this, in response to the happy holidays, oh, everybody who's involved or not, peace to all of us, let the bots fight. This was from somebody who was less aligned with that ideology. And interestingly enough, it occurred right before the split when all the internal Conti communications were linked, presumably by somebody who was more like this communication than the previous one. So this happened shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine. The Conti team officially announced a full support of the Russian government. This is a change in norms. It's a change in their cultural context. They're no longer tolerating political dissent. And it is evidence of state supporting, which is different than state supported. And regional, how many, everybody here knows Fort Meade, right? Like that exit on the highway? Okay, some of you at least nodded. Thank you for the nodders. So 4 Litany Avenue is the FSB, and their discussions talk about Bellingcat. Congratulations, Bellingcat. They're an actual thorn in their side. And Alexia Navalny, who was the lead of the opposition. So you can look at these political nuanced things and use that perspective to better understand your targeting. So when we look at crime, there's 3 types of crime: offline, online, and crime that combines both. So a swim swap provides both. You have to do the recruiting of workers. And we can look at the forums just like we looked at that Enron email corpus. And it is more difficult because it turns out criminals lie. They use multiple identities and they sock puppet. Why would criminals sock puppet other criminals? To signal trust, to have transactions. And single networks vary even within a single forum. So we can look at e-crimes as organizations and look at their hierarchy and note how they match commodity organizations as a large scale. Now, once we got access to Conti, did all of this apply to Conti, Dalya?
Thank you. Everyone knows here what is Conti, right? The ransomware operator. And although Conti name appeared in 2020, the group of people existed for quite a while. The collective group existed for quite a while. Thank you for all those numerous security investigators. We can actually trace this evolution of the group. For example, in 2014, group Dalya appeared, creating banking Trojans, infecting computers with a banking Trojan. But then in 2015, it was partially disrupted by Russian law enforcement. And then in this period, Trigbot appeared. Based on the exhibited similarities and shared developers, we can actually see those are the same group. In 2018, Ryuk ransomware operator appeared, and then it went down in 2020, and that's when Conti appeared, with the same code similarities, with the same people working for it. And then in 2022, the major leak appeared because Conti officially declared support of Russia in an invasion of Ukraine. Well, data leak appeared with all the source code, internal chats, documents, training materials. Do you think this actually stopped Conti? No, really. They had several operations after that, and they reformed to different groups, and evidence shows, such as Karakurt, Xeon, Black Suit, Black Bastard, maybe even more. So the group is still functioning as the collective of people. And why is this important? What does it tell us? Well, we can see the group reassembles back pretty effectively after law enforcement, after the data leak, sort of rebrands and adapts to environment. So what does it tell us? It tells us that it builds resilience as an organizational strength. They're able to use the same network of people they established, and they're able to adapt to the environment. And as a resilient organization, they become resilient threat. So Conti is a great case because Conti is not only the major ransomware operator, but also the most profitable one of all time. And if we look at their social graph, their interactions, not looking at the actual text yet, but just look at the patterns, we can see the scale-free dynamics as well. The most connected people are very few, the most connected sort of leaders. But what if we measure the statistics of the network? All the possible statistics that we can extract from those behavioral communications. Turns out there are 3 distributions that could be extracted: the managers, leaders, the tier membership, the middle tier membership, upper level members. They usually have longer lifespan than the lower tier members. They usually have more established positions, and they tend to have a lot more communication compared to the lower level. And the lower level, more like contractors, even clients in some cases, or people just that do a specific job. And they have very high turnover. So that's pretty straightforward. But what if we look at the breakdown of the statistics? Well, pretty straightforward degree centrality and things like that. We can see that the most connected nodes are the most important. But if we look at the clustering coefficient, the interesting part of a clustering coefficient, it kind of tells us how dense interconnected people are. It turns out the leaders are not that interconnected with each other. However, people in the mid-tier level are a lot more interconnected with each other. So we try to look at those communications, try to figure out what kind of relationships those people build. And that's where we refer to organizational science. If you're part of any organization, you naturally start building connections with people, depending what type of work you do. But essentially, 3 major or even 4 major relationships that you build is based on the power dynamic, your boss or subordinate. Mentorship, people that you perceive as a mentor or people that you perceive as a mentee, sort of show around. And also workflow routine, your day-to-day routine at work, and essentially friendship. People that essentially you become very open, you share personal information. In this case, they actually bridge this anonymity. They break this anonymity. They become more personal with each other, sometimes even inviting to social personal events. So how can we do that? How can we extract those relationships? Well, we can actually look at those textual interactions and actual messages, and we can annotate those messages based on specific markers. So we use computer-mediated discourse analysis, and we extract those markers that show us or hint us a specific type of relationship. Those markers are either linguistic or intention analysis. So things like, oh, someone is using informal or formal addressing will show us different degree of relationship. Or in some languages, for example, you can use a plurality to show respect. Well, for example, in authority relationships, we have markers such as no reciprocity in small talk. If you're a boss, most likely you might ignore reciprocity, you might ignore small talk or not reciprocate it. Sometimes you might even think, oh, this is not an important message, I can reply later. So this delayed reply or maybe no reply at all gives us a certain confidence interval that this is authority relationship. And also intention analysis, which looks at the message and we can see, okay, this message was a work order, this message was a task assignment, and the other way around for the subordinate too, whoever is requesting for supervisor approval or reporting the status update. But also the tone, apologetic tone, most likely be someone who is a subordinate or super polite or thankful or even hedging and pleading. So here's an example. Here in this case, Stern is giving a work order, asked to set up a system, also asked to do it by the specific deadline. And Defender, in this case, accepts the order. So pretty straightforward, right? Here's a more intricate case. Here, Badgett is asking for work order clarifications. But he is using informal addressing, saying, hey, buddy. But also at the same time, he softens his request with hedging, adding those 2 smiles at the end. The relationship type mentorship is pretty straightforward. So those people, whenever they ask for advice or ask for suggestions or people that are themselves offering help, we can see, okay, those people have sort of mentorship relationships here. Here's an example. Zolotoy is asking for help and also adding hedging at the end. I know it might be confusing. He's saying sorry, which is more apologetic tone. But in this case, the purpose was actually hedging the request. Friendship, the most interesting part, is where people start sharing personal information or non-work related sharing opinion, using informal addressing, small talk. All of this gives us sort of distribution of those codes to infer this friendship relationship with them. Here's an example, again, Badgett and Bentley discussing personal matters. They're discussing games. In this case, Bentley is actually sharing information about himself, saying he likes play this specific game, and excitement that he says, oh, I love Civilization myself too. So yeah, we can see this is a certain relationship friendship building here. And that's essentially how a social graph of one person might look. In this case, Badgett is a developer, and we can look at the authority, for example. We see this bold arrow, Stern, his manager, his boss. Badgett himself seems to have an authoritative relationship to others, such as Globus, who is also a developer. At the same time, mentorship network is a little different. We can see that Stern is no longer a mentor, but another person, Hoff, who is a bot herder and also works for TrickBot, seems to have a very strong mentorship relationship with Badgett. And interestingly, Badgett himself has a certain distribution, strong distribution for the Logan at the bottom, whose role was difficult to identify based on the messages. But here's the friendship network, and we can see how Badgett is quite a friendly guy. He's built friendship relationship with almost everyone here. So how can we understand that, knowing all of this dimension of relationships? Well, we can also extract tasks, and knowing tasks, we can identify roles that people play, and essentially come up with a workflow that those groups are having. For example, Conti case, they had a whole entire victim support team focusing just on the victims and making sure that the whole process for the victim goes smoothly, making sure that the payment goes smoothly, data restoration goes smoothly, because this is their branding, that's their reputation. They want to make sure they encourage the victim to pay. So how can we do it? Well, we extract the themes and topics from those messages, and the themes and topics gives a work routine, and essentially once we know this work routine, themes and topics, we can find out who are those people that are involved mostly in those conversations. And that's how we can attribute those roles. Knowing the crime script actually helps too, because we will know what to expect, what kind of tasks to expect. So knowing this ransomware attack chain will also inform the task management of this organization. And essentially, you can break down the whole production of a ransomware. This is a pretty much high level. Everyone's seen that. What people really miss is that there's a whole infrastructure maintenance, this layer of the boring jobs that people have to do in this group to make sure that they provide this technical infrastructure for the organization. And that's essentially pretty straightforward: identification of the target, using actual OSINT tools that are out there to do their research, or contacting access brokers, and the production of a ransomware, which involves not just developers and coders, but also testers, also CobbleStrike configurers and things like that. And then essentially attack preparation, execution of attack, and negotiation, and eventually restoration of the data and this victim support. Another important part is to learn from the mistakes. That's how they adapt. So they have a whole process of adapting to the environment. They collect the feedback from along all the way and making sure that they learn from their mistakes. And that's where the whole management suite is playing the role of collecting the feedback. So now, knowing that, knowing how all of it works and this dimension of a relationship plays a role in this group, Jean, can you tell us how the audience might know the threats?
So what does this mean for you in your operations and data? How does it help you improve your understanding of threats and different risk? Well, your risk, as you know, Jeff Moss basically did this slide in the keynote. Thank you. But also allow you to reevaluate your decisions, how your business decision changes your risk profile. If you think about e-crime not as like these, evil hackers or random amorphous people, but as a part of the competitive landscape that you have to deal with. And their resilience is a risk to your operations. So when you think about this, what is your threat? What tasks have to occur for you to be subverted? Don't just think about it from the attack perspective. Think about it from their perspective. Where do you want to stop that defense? What communities are you associated with? Are you going to step next to a community that they're attacking? What are the norms of the threat actors that you're concerned with? And stop thinking about what forum are you being discussed, but who's talking about you? If Badgett's talking about you, I'm sorry, you're in bad shape. Hopefully, he's not talking about me. And what is happening in your industry and how your competitors are responding. And what are your risks? What's your ransomware or stolen data? What do you really care about in your resilience, compliance, or reputation? So you're part of a market and an industry segment. The one thing I want you to think about after you leave here is how to take your business intelligence, the business intelligence that keeps your company operational, that enabled you to do a startup and apply that to looking at the attackers as businesses, because many of them are state supporting as much as they are state supported. And if you go for that DoD contract, does that change your risk assessment? If you enter a new line of business where your subsidiary is more likely to be attacked, does that increase the risk of everything? And also, what decreases your value as a target, right? So maybe you do want to buy ransomware insurance, but don't tell anybody, right? Because it just made you a more valuable target because you made their task management easier, right? Look for trends and patterns. Consider your downsides. Which forms, what language, which threats, what purposes. I mean, we hear a lot about forum monitoring, but from your domain to, homoglyphs of your domain, to your partners, to your industries. Just like you do trend analysis of your competitors, think about taking the same business intelligence and doing it for your attackers. E-crime is a business. Just like the weather, it's part of your logistics and business decision making. And just like you don't only check the weather when you go outside, but you know it's going to affect your own business, watch for your competitors. Look for organizational moves. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.